its ideology, and its activities. Hany, please tell us about your work and what has brought you to this particular issue.
Good evening, Irina. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood is the oldest, most organized Islamist group. It has been founded since 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, who is regarded as their main ideologue and the main founder and the godfather of all other groups that has spawned from this group. That includes groups that starts from Al-Qaeda all the way to ISIS. They owe a debt of thanks to the Muslim Brotherhood founder. The core fundamentals of Hassan al-Banna is are considered as the foundation of any Islamic or Islamist group in the world right now. Whether these are they have extremist forms or more moderate forms, which is very rare in these cases. Without, you cannot study any jihadist movements or terrorist movements without having to go deeply inside the works of Hassan al-Banna and the Muslim Brotherhood. They have spread since 1928 into over 80 countries worldwide, even more sometimes. They say that over 100, but mainly they have offices in as many as 80 countries. They have been banned as recent in countries such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Russia, and I believe China as well. They do not let them around. And in Austria as well, they have curbed around all their activities as the first European country to do that. Why I'm interested in the Muslim Brotherhood? Because as a counterterrorism analyst, I cannot pretend that I can be fighting the Al-Qaeda at one country or another and pretend that that Muslim Brotherhood's influence doesn't exist. It exists on all forms because through Hassan al-Banna and later through the extremist ideologue Sayyid Qutb, all the ideologies and the fundamentals of jihadist works have been founded there. And you cannot understand how these groups work without understanding the fundamentals of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's why I'm surprised that in the United States, particularly, there is not a lot of research, or maybe there can be some research, but there's not a lot of attention. That no one gives real heed to what the Muslim Brotherhood can turn a society into. Without the Muslim Brotherhood, there could be a much peaceful world that we could live in. No one can really fully appreciate the extent of damage that this group has done, not just in the Middle East, but worldwide.
Just to address the point why there isn't much scholarship to do with the Muslim Brotherhood, there's a couple of reasons for it. First of all, there are think tanks dedicated to tracking some of the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they've had some measure of success of drawing public and government attention to some of particular funding issues, and some of the front organizations such as the Islamic Relief Middle East Forum is one of those organizations. But they have first of all, they can only do as much as they're funded to do. Then the way think tanks operate is that they're funded to investigate particular issues. So it's not like they're a free-for-all for studying everything Muslim Brotherhood related from the beginning to the end. They focus on particular stories that have a potential for drawing public attention, investigation in Congress or by the administration, and they focus on those specific issues. So there are limitations, and no one is actually funding the research in other think tanks focused on this issue at all. Why that is, we can look at who is actually lobbying the think tanks. Most of the control goes used to be by Saudi Arabia when it was under Muslim Brotherhood influence. So naturally, it was not in their interest to do that. Now it's a lot of it is Qatar. UAE has funded some anti-Islamist research, but mostly focusing on things like Al Jazeera and not so much necessary or countering lobbying activities or state activities, but not so much on understanding the principles of the organization itself. At least in the US, it hasn't been the case. Academically, I would address the issue. The funding has been nearly always controlled by pro-Islamist groups. A lot of the Middle Eastern history studies departments are funded by state actors and private actors who are pro-Islamist. And the other issue is linguistic limitations. There simply aren't enough scholars who are fluent enough in the language, either both in Arabic and other languages that are used by pro-Muslim Brotherhood groups to effectively respond to that. So that's been a significant issue. So you won't really see, even when you see politicians, government officials addressing Muslim Brotherhood, they won't quote Hassan al-Banna, they won't really get into text. There is no engagement with the text, with understanding the ideology, and even the structure and funding are relatively superficial. They'll say, oh, well, Qatar and Turkey are funding the Muslim Brotherhood, and Muslim Brotherhood in London is funding, CARE or Islamic Relief International or whatever, but they're not going to delve into how the financing actually works. Who are the members of the Muslim Brotherhood? How do they relate to each other? They will offer relatively superficial explanations and no real engagement. That's a real problem. And I actually want to get back to you on this one. My understanding, and very generally, is that the core of the Muslim Brotherhood has been traditionally focused on cultivating familial ties and getting the inner core relatively close to each other to avoid infiltration. Is that still correct?
Yeah, well, in general, there are two things I would like to discuss here. One of the reasons that the Western academia didn't take heed a lot about the Muslim Brotherhood is that they have successfully managed to convince a lot that they are the moderate voice of Islam. Mm-hmm. And that happened as early as the 1950s and maybe 1960s when they were, when they left Egypt and the Middle East and went in for shelter in Europe and so on. There were political differences between the Egyptian administration back then during Nasser's time and some European countries, especially particularly with Great Britain and so on. So they started to act like they are the voice of reason, and they are the ones that they will they are adopters of democracy and so on, as all the stuff that anyone trying to convince someone with their cause. And that in turn has not led the Western academia to delve deeper into what these people are saying, their manifestos, what are their foundations. Many of them neglected the fact that they aim for a global caliphate, that they would spring from the Middle East all across the known world, and that has hindered a lot of academics to work into, because political reasons came first, that governments looked the other way back then. They needed someone who's an opposition voice to Nasser and so on. Sure. And the second one, they which is the main issue, they call themselves the Muslim Brotherhood. So when you are anti the Muslim Brotherhood, by default, that would mean that you are anti a religious group. which is not right. So they would think of it as some sort of a bigoted activity or so on from their side. So that hindered a lot of efforts in order to show the Muslim Brotherhood's real face to the others. Instead, they have managed through that to spread all across the European country, and they moved to the United States as early as the 1950s. And from there, they have formulated groups upon groups and upon groups. And the secret behind the success of the Muslim Brotherhood propagating is that they don't work all under one name. Instead, they are giving you the same product, okay, under many different names. Let's call it ISNA, let's call it CARE in the United States, let's call it the Muslims of France, Musulmans de France, or so on, and they just move on. So there is a secret in the success of this, because if the Muslim Brotherhood is one group, then they would be easily targeted by any foe or government or so on. So they have managed to spread, and by that they are pretty much repeating the same things that they over and over again under different names. So instead, they spread that the message of the religion of Islam is in that manner. If you understand what I'm saying, they are all spreading the same messages under different name. So any European citizen or academic or politician would understand that this is the core message of Islam. They so on. So we have to listen to these people if we want to talk to Muslims. Then these are the guys to talk to. And this is the great con they have made, is that they have presented themselves as the face of Islam through different names. And this is what is still existent in the United States, particularly now through the likes of CARE and ISNA, and they will get themselves into all sorts of human rights issues. They will bond with African Americans, Asian Americans, Jews, anyone who has a cause. They will go with them, and then the perception is, oh, these folks are great folks, so we have to cooperate with them. These represent the soul of Islam. And this is the core of they have been feeding that message and slowly poisoning the minds. So at the right time, when they say, right, Egypt is a dictatorship, Saudi Arabia is a bad country, and so this is a bad, then everybody has to listen, because these are the moderate guys. You understand what I'm saying? This is how they propagated themselves to be the face of everything related to Islam. And I can't blame the West entirely about Western circles about this, because they for long periods of times, even Middle Eastern governments were okay with this. Okay, or at least they didn't care, as long as that Muslims have some representation in the West. They don't care who's representing. Well, they have infiltrated Al-Azhar, which is the grandest institution in Egypt and the whole Islamic world. They have influenced it in a major way. So when you have some missionaries from Al-Azhar, some of them are affected by these kind of ideologies, and they move for missionary activities in France, Germany, United States, Canada, and so they're pretty much repeating the same mantra that the Muslim Brotherhood are saying. So they are one and the same. And just as recently as a few years ago, governments in Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and a few others have realized how wrong that was. They started to clamp on these ideas we are literally supporting terrorist ideologies by sending over such missionaries with people who are influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood. So it is a crucial issue that now that the helm of the or the image of Islam is held or hijacked by a group like that. This group is responsible for disasters in Egypt, particularly stemming back from the 1920s and 30s. Egypt was one of the most cosmopolitan countries in the world. You could find Muslim, Jews, irreligious Christians, and all. You could find Jewish ministers at the time. You know, Minister of Finance for Egypt was Jewish at the time, where Jews were prosecuted in Germany and all over Europe. So this was I'll tell you something else. The main, well, they call him the godfather of Egyptian cinema. One of the founders of Egyptian cinema was a Jewish man. So instead, this society started to let's say disappear and dissipate slowly with the ideas that the Muslim Brotherhood, starting from the very late 1920s in Ismailia, and it spread all over to Cairo, Alexandria, and everywhere, started fierce issues between Egyptian Christians and Egyptian Muslims started to arise for the first time, and hence forward that this group literally decimated this society ideals to a great extent. Now it's back. Now it is getting better now, but the damage is there. The damage is still there, you know. And so I don't know if that answers your point earlier or not, but even since they influenced the main authority, Islamic authority, with Al-Azhar, they in turn influenced the average citizen. Not every average citizen, mainly, of course, some people were aware and were always aware of their schemes, but they influenced the average Egyptian citizen in a big way, and changed the way he thinks about others, about Europeans, about non-Muslims, and so on. And friction started to appear now. So this is where the Muslim Brotherhood, how the Muslim Brotherhood works, and it is showing also now in other non-Arabic or non-Islamic predominant societies, such as France. You're seeing extremism at an all-time high there. In Germany, the same thing. In Britain, the same thing. All of these societies that have embraced the Muslim Brotherhood and elements as immigrants, as the regular people, they're paying the price now. It is the same. What happened there? But the thing is that these societies have had more cosmopolitan and stronger democratic laws than the ones that were in Egypt, because these laws were still in their infancy back in the 1920s and 30s. I can't say the same thing about France now, because they have a strong secular backdrop that protects the country's tenets. But couldn't say the same about Egypt back then, because it started coming from the bottom up. It started to influence society, the ideologies of Hassan al-Banna. So he was very successful into changing a society with far beyond his wildest dreams. And it came through these franchises that they established. Similar thing that is happening now in the United States. I know the United States is not a predominantly Muslim country, but at least the Muslim population there is getting affected. A part of it, not all of it, of course, but a part of it is getting affected by the same ideas. And hence comes the problem.
Well, I would say that I think most mosques in the US have received funding from Muslim Brotherhood sources. I would also say that political operatives have facilitated this engagement, as as these guys have infiltrated institutions, the military, the law enforcement, security, education under Mubarak from before Mubarak, but they made a very comfortable alliance under Mubarak, who was not himself obviously Muslim Brotherhood. In the United States, you've seen—
He was not, but he simply looked the other way, like many governments before. He looked the other way. They are okay. They we don't want to get into troubles.
In the US, the same thing happened. As I was mentioning earlier, Muslim Brotherhood here mostly attached itself to the Democratic Party, but I should note that Grover Norquist, Republican political operator under George W. Bush, introduced Muslim Brotherhood into political Republican circles and law enforcement circles. And until 9/11, George W. Bush was listening to his advice on that issue. Of course, after 9/11, Bush canceled meetings with some of these guys and went hardline.
Went to the mosque operated by CARE. You know, he went to a mosque with Nihad Awad operating by CARE. That was a very famous video where he said the Islam means peace and all that. And next to him was Nihad Awad, the very Muslim Brotherhood jihadist, Palestinian jihadist, who's operating CARE right now. So it is not, it's not a secret that somehow they turned a disaster, which is like 9/11, into a victory for them. So they have managed that.
And during the Arab Spring, the Obama intelligence agencies advised him about the very same issue you mentioned earlier, about the quote-unquote moderation of political Islam, precisely because of the word political, that they would take over the institutions, but at least they would not be doing terrorist attacks. Of course, this was nonsensical then, and they knew it was nonsensical then. They knew that these guys were getting disproportionate amount of funding and media attention, that they were suppressing liberal anti-Islamist voices. They knew that they were funding terrorist organizations. They knew that some of their members were becoming terrorists. Some of them were joining Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and so forth. They knew that there was an interconnection between terrorist organizations and Muslim Brotherhood. They knew that Muslim Brotherhood was offering other types of material support, such as documents for planned terrorist attacks and logistical support. So they were actively facilitating attacks, even if the politicians were not actively involved in violent actions. So this connection was obvious even then. And I think, I think it's hard for me to imagine that the intelligence agencies were not familiar with the texts that encouraged a two-track approach through political institutions and through a violent path, which were not at any point mutually exclusive, which Hassan al-Banna and Said Qutb both very much supported. It's hard for me to imagine that intelligence agencies would not be familiar with that ideological textbook approach that has manifested itself over the decades before the Arab Spring and leading up to the Arab Spring. So I can't imagine that in good faith, these guys actually believed that there was such a thing as a moderate Islamist. I can't imagine that they did not understand that these guys were anything other than more patient Islamists. That's
no, I know. I never believed that there are moderate Islamists. They are well. It may sound extremist, but an Islamist, and by definition, is like a jihadist on the bench. Okay, it's not bench. At the right time, they will act. They will act as a jihadists do. Okay, Islamists are jihadists on the bench. That's all.
And this idea was sold to the American public with full knowledge of political institutions, full knowledge of intelligence agencies, and law enforcement, which was by that point already infiltrated by a number of these individuals. There are formal training sessions between U.S. law enforcement and intelligence agencies and Islamist groups. We know that it's a fact. We know that CARE and some of these other groups trained CIA. They trained law enforcement on sensitivity issues, on Islam-related issues, and so forth. So what can we expect if there are people who have active partnerships with these guys and who benefit directly from engagement with these guys pushing that narrative, even knowing fully well that that narrative is at best inaccurate and quite frankly fallacious and duplicitous. So this was sold to the US public. It was sold to the point that Americans who didn't even have any contact with these groups came to believe that these are legitimate representatives, not because they were brainwashed in the mosques, not because they pay attention to the media, but because their own government told them that this is the case. So the US government helped sell Islamism and Muslim Brotherhood to Americans. That's as far as I see the Republicans.
Well, I don't see how the decision maker in the United States are not aware of this issue particularly, and they don't have enough researchers or academics to settle the score and settle this issue once and for all, considering that the Muslim Brotherhood activities in other countries has been destructive, from Egypt to Morocco, from all the way to Iraq and so on, and the splinter groups that keep surfacing every few years from that group. I can't understand that even with they don't say, I understand the fact that they don't say we are Muslim Brotherhood per name as in the United States. They come under the names of CARE, ISNA, and other types of groups. But why till this moment not list the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist entity? Because they say they have not done anything in their name in the United States or some other country. But that is the core issue. They would always do that. They are like delegating their dirty work to other splinter groups, and they are sit on the top of the hill there, watching things how things are going on.
So basically, I'll tell you something. I personally have engaged in analyzing whether or not there's enough legal support to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization as defined by US counterterrorism laws. And I've vacillated on that issue for a significant period of time until I started noting more active participation of Muslim Brotherhood directly in terrorist attacks, specifically in African countries. We've seen attempted attacks in Sudan. We've seen attempted abductions and other attacks in Egypt within the last couple of years, not 20, 30 years ago, recently, after the fall of the Morsi regime and after the fall, and leading up to and shortly after the fall of the Bashir regime in Sudan. We've seen these efforts. We've seen active facilitation of terrorist attacks by the Brotherhood, which went far beyond mere funding of terrorism, and it under the US law, this level of involvement would be absolutely classified as a conspiracy under the RICO statute. It would absolutely be justifiable to consider them part of a conspiracy when they take active steps to facilitate a violent attack or another crime, which they did by providing attackers with documents and logistical information and acting as accessories to that crime. That would absolutely be enough to prosecute them as active members of a conspiracy, at the very least, in the US. But
no one took a hint. No one took a hint from the fact that the current leader of Al Qaeda was a former Muslim Brotherhood. The ISIS, the deceased Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Islamic State founder, was a Muslim Brotherhood. The Boko Haram of Nigeria and all their affiliated groups there were Muslim Brotherhood. Some of them even studied in Al-Azhar at some part and moved back to Nigeria. So why all these indicators are not considered? That a Muslim Brotherhood found Al-Qaeda, founded ISIS, founded this, founded that. So why all these indications are not taken for granted? Well, the source must be wrong with the source, which in this case is the Muslim Brotherhood. Nobody gives a thought about this.
Well, I wouldn't say that nobody did. In fact, Senator Cruz, whom you've seen today speaking out against the campaign to pressure Egypt to release terrorists and Muslim Brotherhood extremists and so forth, he initiated an attempt to designate Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization.
Yes, very respectable attempt, but unfortunately he wasn't backed by enough politicians and congressmen.
And following that, he did
senators,
unless, he more recently initiated an attempt to, at the very least, create monitoring mechanisms that that is nothing that anyone should have any objections to. It's obviously an extremist ideology involved in a lot of different illegal activities. So that initiative is a less controversial step, but the reason his efforts failed were on two fronts. First of all, the Trump administration was ultimately opposed to the designation of the Muslim Brotherhood. The president had been briefed by various US government agencies, including the Pentagon, including the State Department, and they advised against the practicability of such designations, and they themselves had been lobbied by the Muslim Brotherhood very actively, much more so than any proponents of this measure, because most people are simply not engaged enough.
That is one thing to consider. That is one thing to consider. But what about all these countries that have designated the Muslim Brotherhood as are they in worse state by any means, whether it's Russia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia?
Here's the issue.
They cut their ties with the rest of the world, or like all these considerations that have been given to President Trump before? No. Life goes on, but they have designated the group as a terrorist group. The active members of that group cannot be active in any of these countries and henceforth.
Well, here's the issue. The issue is that US and all of these countries have different definitions of terrorism and how it is defined. So unfortunately, unfortunately for this particular cause, I'm not saying that it's unfortunate in general. It may be very good to have those distinctions, but terrorism in the US has a very specific and narrow definition, much more so than in all of the above countries. So one of the objections was legal, but as I told you personally, after following more closely the activity of the Muslim Brotherhood in other countries, I noted that these legal objections could be overcome given Muslim Brotherhood's role in active conspiracies as co-conspirators in violent actions, and not merely funders or ideological backers, which was the previous obstacle to this designation. So the legal distinction was one major argument against that happening, that US simply has a different legal definition of terrorism from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and so forth, and therefore although we can be informed on the dangers of Muslim Brotherhood through their examples, we cannot simply just follow them and designate it automatically. So the legal objection was one thing, but the political objection, I believe, played at least as great, if not greater, a role, in that they had heavily married themselves to the Democratic Party operatives and various civil servants who are mostly Democrats, who are not appointed by anybody, who just apply for jobs and stay there no matter who is in office as president. They have been able to infiltrate those circles very successfully. On the Republican side, on the other hand, you have 40 categories of people, aside from a few very vocal voices like Senator Cruz, people who simply are not engaged on anything security or foreign policy related, and therefore they don't care, they don't pay attention, they don't even know what's going on. Second issue is people who have an awareness and even the sympathy to the argument, but it's simply not their priority. They don't understand the danger of it sufficiently to make it a priority. The third category of people are corrupt, and they probably are paid off to stay silent. They cannot openly support these groups without being taken to task by their own party leadership, but they're corrupt. And the fourth category of people are people who conflate Islamists with all Muslims, and it's probably better if they don't actually speak out on the subject at all, because they're just as damaging, and they actually bolster the Muslim Brotherhood accusations of bigotry. So we have the majority, unfortunately, of Republican officials belong to one of those four categories. They're simply not galvanized enough, and there is not enough of an anti-Islamist movement in the US to counter these Islamist institutions. No one is funding think tanks or anti-Islamist movements. There's a lot of opposition to Iran, but there's not similarly movement against the Muslim Brotherhood and its activities. This just isn't. So unfortunately, that's a major political obstacle to overcome for those who are trying to speak out on the issue. Today, I would say, was the first time when a politician on the floor gave specific examples of extremists and terrorists who are being portrayed as human rights defenders and moderate political voices, and saying, no, these guys are not human rights defenders, they're not moderates, they're engaged in incitement to violence, in seditious activities, and terrorism, and all three of those activities would be banned in any country, including the United States, not just Egypt, and therefore they belong in prison. That was the first time when that actually happened, because up until this time, this human rights campaign Muslim Brotherhood backed have always focused on promoting specific individuals that are then lionized and by the media and by lobby groups and by particular members of Congress, and there's no real discussion on who those people actually are. They're not human rights defenders, they're self-interested people who themselves are involved in human rights abuses. That's the reality. You can criticize the Egyptian or Saudi governments for their legal approaches to the system, but you have to acknowledge that these people are not a better alternative at all, and in fact, they're by far worse. So that's the first time that this happened, and it's interesting that this development took place simultaneously as there was a major, as you described in the article, split in the Muslim Brotherhood. And before we get into that, I wanted you to discuss for the public how it came to be, what is the Muslim Brotherhood structure, who is at the core of its leadership, how is it organized, and why is this discussion of its leadership and split useful? Because you just described a phenomena that's comparable to comic book Hydra or Spectrum or Cobra, these infinite organizations with numerous arms that will partner with anybody, and sometimes even appear to be fighting with themselves or against themselves, but in reality they are deliberately pretending to be the antagonistic to themselves just to keep their cover. So we have that phenomenon, and they are very much have taken that playbook to the next level. But right now we are talking about the fact that there is in fact a core acknowledged public leadership. Who are these people? How did what is the Muslim Brotherhood actual structure? How does it function? And how is the funding distributed? Let's talk about that, and then
there are two elements in the Muslim. Let's talk about the basic elements in Egypt, and then there is the global Muslim Brotherhood, which is similar but a different thing. Let me explain the main one. It is the structure is a like a hierarchy, a pyramid structure, whereas there's general guide, which was at time its foundation was Hassan al-Banna. And right now, this position is vacant because of the imprisonment of the latest general guide. But so now he has been replaced by an acting general guide who is Ibrahim Munir, located in the United Kingdom, which is a first in the history of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's the guy we are referring to in the latest article, where the Turkish chapter of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood are attempted to oust him a few weeks ago. The main thing is that this the general guide has a deputy, and then there is the Irshad, Majlis al-Irshad, or the Irshad Council. That comes a second. They are the elite or the higher echelon of the Muslim Brotherhood. Then the Shura Council, which usually has about 90 members, who usually elect the Irshad Council, which is a smaller one, about 7 members. Below these three high tiers, then there are the smaller groups, the smaller chapters. They call them a branch, a small branch here, Osar. Oh, they call them Osar in Arabic means families. Okay, a small family here, a small family. Families not by not the means of like you could say in the Italian mob style families, smaller families here. They operate into different cities and towns, and usually they are led by one major chief or captain there, and who gets the orders from the upper echelons, Maktab al-Irshad and the Shura Council, the council bureau, and the Shura Council, and then he transferred these orders from above to the smaller families who operate on ground level, who operate in universities, labor unions, everywhere. And this is how it is built, and it's a pyramid. It's a pyramid hierarchy, starting from the general guide, who used to be Muhammad Badi', but he's imprisoned now. And he was after that an acting general guide was Mahmoud Izzat, is also in prison now. So the only one out of prison now is Ibrahim Munir. The fall of both Muhammad Badi' and Mahmoud Izzat has split hard the Muslim Brotherhood. It was a devastating blow, especially with Mahmoud Izzat being the mastermind behind most of the violence that took place in Egypt after their ousting in 2013 revolution. And that sentiment has been transmitted to the rest of the chapters worldwide of the Muslim Brotherhood. Whether some of them has fled to Turkey and became protected by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the Turkish regime, or some of them have fled to Qatar, and both are still operating in certain ways. But recently, as a manner of rapprochement with the Egyptian government, both Turkey and Qatar have limited to an extent the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood on their own soil. So they have limited what they can say in media and so on, but they haven't arrested them, of course. But there are talks, but I cannot certify them for sure that some of the wanted elements from the Muslim Brotherhood in both countries may be extradited to Egypt in the near future. But these are simple talks, and both the Qatari and Turkish regimes are very hesitant to take that move, because it will be their credibility among the Islamists will be deeply shaken. So that's why there are rumors that they be moving to third country, whether that country be the United Kingdom. But the United Kingdom has now a prime minister who's hostile to these kind of groups. So they may, but not exactly hostile, but he's more hostile than the previous ones. So it might not be exactly the best place option. The other option is Malaysia. Believe it or not, it is more hospitable to Islamist ideologists now, and it can be their next headquarters for the Muslim Brotherhood. And I have explained mainly the Egyptian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood, but there is also the Muslim Brotherhood Global, who are exactly they follow the tenets of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they convene into different European countries, sometimes in Germany, sometimes in United Kingdom, and they would be still headed by the Egyptian general guide. They can have other members from other countries like the Syrian chapters or the Jordanians or Iraqi or so on, and they would convene under the name of the Global Muslim Brotherhood, but they would be still ruled by the general guide or the acting general guide as it happens now, and this is simply how they are organized.
And where is the funding for these activities coming from? Who is actually in charge of disbursing the funding? Is it centralized to some extent, or each cell and family responsible for its own activities and then contribute something to the general?
You mean the funding of the Muslim Brotherhood in general?
Mm-hmm.
Well, from the early days of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna instilled a fundamental law or bylaw that each and every member would donate a part of his, like something like 10% of his earnings, monthly earnings, and it would be all shifted to a certain funds to finance all sorts of activities of the Muslim Brotherhood. Think about something that goes as back as 1928, almost as 90 something, 93, 94 years old. And after that, donations started to flood from Muslim businessmen, Muslim traders, anyone with as far as the group has emerged, they at one time they had their own bank, which was called the Taqwa Bank in Switzerland, but you know, was operated from Switzerland, but wasn't in Switzerland particularly. But that has been defunct and dissolved a long time ago. And they have their own means of finance, and they are among the richest organization on the whole planet. Despite the clampdowns, they always find a way to place their funds into different names, different accounts, and escrows, and so on. So it's not that hard for them to finance their activity. Despite now that it is a bit harder, thanks to the works of the Egyptian and Saudi and Emirati governments have been under international accounts, and they essentially they have informed their Western counterparts about these activities, should they wish to look into them or not. But mainly, each and every member of the Muslim Brotherhood donates about 10% of their earnings, whether they earn millions or earn a few bucks. That doesn't matter. Just 10%, and all of those accumulate to help them keep reaching out, continuing their missionary work, and establishing companies. There are a lot of companies that actual companies, industrial companies that were known to be under the name of known Muslim Brotherhood members and businessmen. And here in Egypt, we had plenty of those till recently. The government has planned, as recent as a couple of years ago, there were over 200 companies that are operated with their own factories, with their own links, and so on. They range from industries all the way to travel agencies. So they have a variety of ways to operate in that. And that kind of activity drove billions of Egyptian pounds and eventually billions of dollars to these members. They were among the richest businesses in Egypt.
As some reports have indicated, these networks of proxies, as you've said, under different names but doing the same thing, have kind of interchangeable personnel, and they've made it very difficult to trace the funding. Some of them have been co-indicted co-conspirators in terrorist charity trials in Western countries, but ultimately they've restructured, they've reshuffled their boards. They've kind of confused the paperwork in their registration, and all this financing in and between these different structures has been made very, very obscure. Is there any sort of systematic effort to trace these proxy accounts and organizations in Western and other countries that are responsible for these circulation of this external funding outside the main, London and whatever Turkish offices?
Well, as far as Egypt's concerned and Saudi Arabia and Emirates, they have vented a lot of these accounts and companies, and they have clamped on them, and especially the ones that has been transferring funds to certain names that are known to be active members of the group and so on. And other than that, the company is placed under monitoring from government and so on in order to keep its functioning. I mean, the company may be owned by Muslim Brotherhood, but the workers are certainly not Muslim Brotherhood or anything related to that. So instead, they just made sure that this is not a source of income to the Muslim Brotherhood, but it can be a source of income as a regular company to the workers there who are not affiliated by their terrorist activities. That's how it's done. Definitely, Egypt has sent a lot of names and accounts to be monitored to the Interpol as well to the Europol. And also to certain countries where we have high level of security coordination, such as the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Greece, and so on. So through that, you can trace the funding to certain entities, and hence you can manage to contain some of these activities, and it's showing. I mean, as early in 2013, we had literally hundreds of terrorist operations going on in the country, ranging from big bombings all the way to stabbings and just small shootings. And now there is none of that. Thank God. No, maybe once in a while something that could happen in a country in an area like North Sinai or something. But thank God it's much safer now, and even the emergency laws has been lifted last week. So this is a testament that things are going for the better right now. So it is there is work, and there will always be work, because these companies keep changing, and they can create new shell companies and so on. So the work is never ending here, especially that most European countries as well as the United States and Canada don't recognize the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorist entities, or it would have been much simpler. Okay, like it is with Al Qaeda or ISIS or so on, which are recognized as terrorist entities by the West, but not the Muslim Brotherhood. So instead, you have to work on your own. In this case, was the case of the Egyptian decision maker. So this is how it is done. So other activities are monitored through the, like I said, through communications and so on between the members, and some such as big catches, such as Mahmoud Azzad, would spill the beans about the some of their activities, and they found laptops and papers in his house that connects the dots between what sort of money is going where. So it was like the whole case was there. So it made their lives easier, just capturing Mahmoud as the last acting general guide. Can I pause for a second to tell you something for a second?
Sure.
The battery here is less than 20%. Could I recharge it for a while, quick charge it, and come back for a while? Do you still have a long time? Or?
Well, I was just going to give a couple of questions. I'll try to wrap it up into a kind of mega question that will be easier for you to answer before the battery runs out.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, in addition to what you just said, the Muslim Brotherhood has been plagued by accusations of internal corruption, mismanagement, and internal issues, which is some of what we are seeing with this instant split. What can you tell us about these issues? What is this? Do you believe this is the indication of significant internal divides within the organization as a whole that can render it ineffective? And what's the fate of it in light of these divisions? Do you think the proxies will suffer significantly as a result of this internal structural damage?
Corruption in the within the Muslim Brotherhood was a very well-known case for years, but they have managed to mask it for a long while. But the lid now is open on that. The main thing is that the Turkish chapter that has fled the country and took Turkey as a place of resident and refugee has been receiving donations, millions of dollars of donations from the Turkish government, which was a foe to Egypt till very recently, and I still consider it as one, that regime. And the thing is that the general secretary of the Muslim Brotherhood, Mahmoud Hussein, has bought himself a car, and as well as two cars particularly, and one BMW for his son, as well as they have bought a building in Istanbul and under their own names. And they have been the higher echelon of this group. The Turkish chapter has been spreading the money there. Meanwhile, most of the younger generation of the Muslim Brotherhood who follow them to Turkey are literally penniless, and they have been begging in the streets, some of them actually, and they have been showing videos of that recently. So this stirred a certain amount of anger. Ibrahim Munir in United Kingdom has been known to distance himself from the youth a lot, and as recent as a couple of years ago, he told the Muslim Brotherhood youth that we didn't force you because they were complaining that they are not interfering with the Egyptian government or doing anything about the imprisoned members who are imprisoned because of their terrorist activities in Egypt, that they are not interfering with with either the Egyptian government or any international entities. He simply told them, Ibrahim Munir, the acting general guy, that we didn't force anyone's hand into joining the Muslim Brotherhood. He said that blatantly in public, which stirred everyone against him. So there was a lot of animosity towards him being an older member who was being detached from the rest of the group and so on. So he used this matter in his favor in trying to clamp on the Turkish side, which was not sharing part of that money or anything, and they're acting on their own, and exposed the whole thing with the help of some of their own whistleblowers in Egypt, such as some of their former members here, and the whole thing blew up, and the corruption issues, which was kept under wraps for many years, became out in the open. Whether this will cause a certain split, a long-term split, and while they are denying, I'm sure it will cause a big split, because for the first time, the Turkish chapter is attempting to oust the Muslim Brotherhood acting general guy, and they said that in a public and an official statement. Instead, he sent before that he sent them a notice of suspension, and sent them to investigation for allegations of the corruption and embezzlement and so on. If these are the two general main bodies of the Muslim Brotherhood, aside from members of that so-called global Muslim Brotherhood, but these are members who run things on a major part. They are into a mortal combat right now, if you can call it. So one of them has to toss the other. The Muslim Brotherhood group members or activists always believed in the sanctity of the upper or higher echelon of the group and their names, and they spoke about them in extreme reverence and extreme humbleness and respect. That's no longer the case. You can monitor all their chats and on the internet and so on, and they are cursing them with swear words and so on. So there is no longer that sort of respect amongst the group members that they would follow a certain leadership. Well, aside from that, aside from them, from the Turkish side, maybe announcing their independence from the whole group, there's a third chapter that might arise, which is comprised of the youths who are saying we should follow the teaching of Al-Banna and stay away from the politics and etc., and so on. And these divisions are lethal to the group unity. There can be, it is hard to foresee how they can replace the current general guide who's in prison, and the next in line is Ibrahim Munir, who is around 84 years old, and there would have to be a sort of election from the Shura Council to a new guide, and that is not possible at the current security situation. They can't meet in most Arab countries, most of European countries. They are under alert of certain things to happen. So if Ibrahim Munir sometime resigns or dies or something, there will be, that top tier will be vacant for a long time, and there is no legitimacy for the current group in Turkey, given that they have been tainted with the corruption allegation. And it's not allegations, it's actual facts, to be honest. So they can't claim, oh, I'm the general guide. This will be the death of the group as we know. But then again, like bad ideas die hard, so we will find someday that there will be the real Muslim Brotherhood's group, or the Sons of Hassan al-Banna group, or splinters groups that can emerge like these. But the core Muslim Brotherhood that has been kept intact in hierarchy since 1928, despite everything that they went through, all the way till now, maybe no longer there within a few years.
Do you believe that, given what you just earlier said, that these state actors funding these organizations, Qatar and Turkey, who have temporarily, at least, trying to make some sort of an arrangement with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and so forth, but have clearly been still funding external activities such as the current anti-Egyptian campaign in the United States, do you think that they will take this opportunity to actually increase their direct hold over the remnants of the organization and try to direct the flow of the organization and its network? Or do you think it's much more likely to kind of self-sabotage, fall apart, scramble, and just splinter away into nothingness? What's going to happen with the proxies and these NGOs? And
as you know, that both governments or regimes of Turkey and Qatar have found that it is not exactly beneficial to keep going with this charade any longer. The whole deal of supporting Islamists in order that they would take the helm of being the leaders of Muslim, it ain't working anymore. It has found objections from strong political, and even it's approached military, as Egypt and Turkey were this close to getting into a military conflict in the Mediterranean last year. Wasn't that things went down a bit? So it is not working. They have spent hundreds of billions on that failed project, particularly with Qatar, and it's not getting them any friends or anything. There's no outlook that any Muslim Brotherhood group whom they are supporting will act as their proxy in any of these countries as they initially planned, and as the Turkish wannabe sultan planned. So he wanted to, that is no longer workable. So instead, they are trying to find ways to compromise without looking like complete fools. Okay, so one way is shutting down the Muslim Brotherhood TV networks in their countries, such as Mükemmelin and so on, that broadcasted and operated from Turkey, for example, and as a gesture. But the damage was done, and if these actions were taken like 5-6 ago, they would have meant something to Egypt and Saudi Arabia and so on, because it was at the core of the battle was terrorism. But now such gestures are a little bit too late. Okay, it doesn't say that there won't be relations with these countries, with Egypt and Saudi Arabia, against them. So, but it will not be as a high priority for the country that has been affected by the damages caused by the Turkish and Qatari regime to come back on the table for that reason, because simply there isn't anything enticing that they could be presenting to them at the current moment. So there will be relations, but diplomatic relations haven't been severed exactly, despite that Egypt had at one time withdrew the ambassador and so on. But at the same level, things can't go back the way they are with the presence of the current regime, particularly the one in Turkey, because he's mainly known to be a part of the global Muslim Brotherhood, and his ideology has reflected on the way he treats his policies for long years, and hence that Egypt has made a lot of coalitions with the Saudi Arabia and Emirates and so on one end, and with France and Austria and Greece and Cyprus, the ones that are feeling that the threat of the Islamist regimes on their countries and how much damages that they can cause. So there will be relations, because Turkey is a big country and a lot of historical relations with them. But with this current regime, it can't go cordial again, especially that he is facing a lot of domestic and economic troubles and so on. So one way or another, he will go. I mean, Erdogan, of course.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like the future of Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliates is not bright. And the people in the West who've bet on these relationships may have bet on the wrong horse, because when these groups sooner or later run out of funding and political support, they will no longer be able to accommodate these interests. And these interests, the lobbies, the politicians, will have already lost the trust of anti-Muslim Brotherhood governments around the world, and they'll be kind of stuck with
the truth finds a way always. The truth finds a way always. Irina, even no matter how managed they lie, how managed to scheme around them. I mean, the Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood. Eventually, people come to their senses and realize what has been going on, where they were wrong, and so on. But it takes time and it causes damages and so on. But that's life. We can't do anything about it.
But from what you said, your article revealing these issues has been actually quite explosive, because I haven't seen anything like that at all in the West. I'd like to mention what it is by name. It's called Division Strike the Muslim Brotherhood by Hany Ghoraba on the investigative project on terrorism from October 29th. I recommend that everyone listening to this read it for in detail. The reason I'm beginning to understand that the reason it hasn't been picked up widely in the Western media is because it's so dangerous, because revealing that at the core, the Muslim Brotherhood ship is sinking, and we don't know how long it's going to take to sink, but the hole is there, and it's not, most likely not really, you can't really fully patch it up. That is a damaging idea that breaks through all the narratives that have been built up by Muslim Brotherhood lobbies and the paid hacks and everyone else. And imagine if this gets to the core of the decision makers in Congress, in the administration, if they see that they're working with a failing group, they will not, that will cause significant rifts, and they will start looking for a way out of those relationships. That's not something that can happen. Maybe it's not a coincidence that your article has not gotten much more attention than it really deserves, given what a major paradigm shifting development. It's a game changer. It's a complete, what you said is potentially a game changer, and it's not in the interest of the pro-brotherhood forces to allow it to be taken advantage of. But I think it would be fair to recommend, based on what you told us, to first disseminate the information that Muslim Brotherhood is failing faster than anyone would even expect, that it's not a viable structure for any relationships, leaving aside its ideology. Let's say people are complete sellouts, it's still not in their interest to bet on a losing horse. And second, I would say, given what we've discussed, given the organized crime structure of the Brotherhood itself, maybe it makes sense to start shifting away from just looking at terrorism, but instead going after them as one would go after organized crime. That's far less controversial. There are very successful Western initiatives and models in fighting that, and quite simply, maybe it's time to just bring it out by any means possible. Leave terrorism aside. That's just one of the things that they do. But at the end of the day, they're looking for control, and terrorism is just, at the end of the day, is just a tactic. So maybe go after them as you would go after a power-hungry group, whatever the methods that it uses. Maybe that's the way to finally finish them off. That's what I'm taking out from what you said.
Yes, absolutely agree. And I think the world is changing towards their vision about the Muslim Brotherhood from a decade ago has dramatically changed. I see changes in certain people, even the ones who are not acknowledging it now. They can't really evade the facts any longer. So they either stopped they're defending them at one point, or at least acknowledge that they were wrong. So I think things can change for the better, and not certainly for the better of the Muslim Brotherhood in the next few years. It's as this holiness around this halo that they surrounded themselves is now getting exposed by their own people, by their own members, in their own countries of origin, and so on. So it's becoming futile to try to defend. It's becoming more being more royal than a king to defend such a troubled terrorist affiliated organization that had nothing but bad news, brought nothing but bad news for nearly a century to the rest of the world. That's it.
So I hope everyone listening to this will take away that let's not pretend that the naked emperor actually has clothes. Exactly. Let's not prop up a paper tiger that does not have the power it pretends to have. Let's exploit these divisions. The solution is contained in itself. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's a failing weak structure filled with internal issues, contradictions, and tensions. And this is something law enforcement organizations are well equipped to deal with. We've seen that how they've been taking down organized crime groups. So I think the future is very bright, not for the Muslim Brotherhood, but for those who are fighting it. And I hope that this message that you just gave us can be shared widely, and we'll hopefully distribute this conversation as far as possible. And no matter who is trying to suppress these conclusions and your article from being seen, they won't be able to, because I have 22,000 followers. Each of those followers have their own, and this message will get out.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Irina, for that support, and hope that your readers would find it an interesting and informative article, along with others ones that I write for Al-Ahram or CSSP. I wrote an interesting one about Nigerian situation there, about the Boko Haram last night, and I think it shed some light about a very tragic situation there caused by Boko Haram, and who are the students of the Muslim Brotherhood, by the way, and one way or another. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope to have you here soon again, because your work is always top notch, and always I learn something new.
I appreciate the great efforts you're doing, Irina. Really, I'm really hoping that to see you everywhere again, and all the mainstream things, because people need voices like you everywhere.
Thank you, and as you've said, I think the truth will eventually triumph, and to have the
it comes out no matter how it gets suppressed. It comes out. That's the best thing. That's why we keep on writing. That's why you keep on broadcasting. It comes out eventually.
Thank you so much. And for everyone else, this was the Washington Outsider Report with Hany Ghoraba on the Coalition Radio. See you all again next week, same time, same place.
Thank you very much.